All right. Hi, everyone. I am going to go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you for joining us here today. Welcome to Tsai City and to today's event, which is about how to innovate effectively within government and politics. Can everyone hear me okay? If I can get a thumbs up. Awesome. Thank you. So we have a very exciting panel lined up, but before I introduce them, I'm going to share a few quick notes. So first, here at Tsai City, we always like to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Indigenous peoples and nations have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut and Yale University. And also just a heads up, we really value feedback here at Tsai City. Feedback is how we can bring you events like this. So my colleague Matt is going to drop in toward the end of this event. There he is waving a feedback survey. So please keep an eye out for that. So this event is going to be a pretty casual conversation. I'm going to ask our panelists a few questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to you because this really should be about what you want to hear as innovators. And so while the panelists are talking, go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. And then once we open things up, you can just use the raise hand function and we will get to you. That said, since this is a pretty informal chat, if you can turn on your camera, that would be absolutely amazing. If not, no worries. So with that, I'm going to get to our guests. So with us today, we have Phaedra Ellis-Lamkins from Promise. There she is. We have Jeff Kaiser from Propel and Luke Fretwell from ProudCity. Welcome to the three of you, and thank you so much for being here. We're very thankful for your time. I think to start, all of our audiences, students and members of the public, would love to hear basically your stories, what your ventures are about, how you got there, and most importantly, I think the way that I'd love to frame it is, what is the mission that you are on? So maybe, Phaedra, we can start with you.
Feels like such a potentially long question, like your life purpose and mission of your company. A little bit about me. I spent the formative part of my career in the labor movement, representing working people, including working on a campaign at Yale. So I'm very excited to be here for living wages. From there was really struck by, I was in Silicon Valley running a labor federation and really struck by how technology was negatively impacting working people. Went in to run a nonprofit and strangely ended up working with the musician Prince. And the thing I discovered working with Prince is that technology was also playing a negative role for artists, specifically artists of color who owned their own music and content. And so I was really just interested in how do you use technology so that it improves the life of working people. Didn't want to go to business school. So I went to work at a tech startup called Honor and spent time there, learned a lot, ended up running revenue and operations there. And now I'm on the board was there for a while. And then I just learned a ton about how to grow a company, how to fundraise, how to execute. But it was really important to me that we use technology to improve the lives of working people. And I wanted to measure my life. There's something very clear when you're working to affirm justice, when you measure your success by the improvement of other people's life. And when you're out of sync with that, I just don't think, for me, I work as effectively. And so I really wanted to find a way in which I felt like I was bending the arc of justice. So we started Promise in 2017, really focused at the time on the criminal justice system, trying to understand how did we scale bail reform. What we quickly discovered, we had some early success, is that we didn't like our clients. And because they were sheriffs, the federal government was talking to us, the state of Alabama. And I just was like sitting in a couple rooms and I just said, these can't be who we give technology to. In some ways, when systems are inefficient, it's actually better for people, right? Efficiency could actually be problematic for people. And so we kind of took some time and tried to think about what fundamentally Promise was about. And what Promise was about was really about restoring dignity, giving people choices and opportunity. And so one thing we wanted to understand as we looked at the kind of highest risk folks and the people who are least likely to show up for court are actually people on a suspended driver's license. And so we wanted to understand why people got suspended driver's license, had been sitting in New Orleans and realized that people were in jail for parking tickets, which seemed insane, and tried to think about what we could do. And so we went and we met with Oakland and we said, we have this great idea. We think you could do payments better so that people don't end up incarcerated. Because what we found when we went to Oakland is if you couldn't afford a ticket, because we're trying to understand how do people end up with their license suspended. If you can't afford a ticket, you had to owe at least $500 to put yourself on a payment plan. You had to pay $250 up front. You had to come in the office. You had to give a copy of your taxes. And so we thought structurally the system is broken. So we ended up loaning people money ourselves to see if we could make a better system. And 94% of people paid us back, Oakland, Denver, and Philadelphia. And so now what we do is we use those learnings and we provide software for governments to be able to do payment plans so that in the same way you can buy a Peloton and Affirm with no interest, we think that's what government should do with people who can't afford their bills. And so we work on water, child support, in the criminal justice system. And we do interest-free payment plans, and just started actually because of COVID pushing money out. So we used to just take money in and do payments. And now we actually have begun to push money out so people can get immediate relief. And I just think the fundamental part of our company is that we think software should be built for people who need it the most. And so if you think about payment systems, they're built for people who pay all the time. And I think that's structurally broken. They should be built for the people who struggle, who need weekly payments, Cash App, Venmo. And that's what we do.
Amazing. Thank you so very much. Jeff, if you could share next.
Cool. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I was a Yale undergrad a bunch of years ago, and so it's always nice to come back and chat with Yale people. I was at SOM a few years ago, speaking on to the Mint group. So pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Let's see. After Yale, I went to work in consulting. I worked for a firm called Dahlberg doing international development consulting, social impact oriented consulting. I had always thought I would orient my career towards international development and specifically like working on economic opportunities in the developing world. Did that for 3 years, had a great time, learned a lot, but never really felt like I was all that responsible for creating impact. Felt like I got really good at making slides, really good at talking to like rural farmers in Nigeria, but didn't always feel like my work was landing in like the place of having direct impact on real people. I spent a year, my last year at Dahlberg, I moved to Nigeria and spent a year helping open our presence there. And I think that was like my first real exposure to entrepreneurship. Like, what does it actually look like to build a business from the ground up? And it included everything from like finding an office space to hiring our first people, while I was also doing some consultant project work, but was just having so much more fun with the like building a business from scratch type experience. So after a year there, I came back to the US, left Dahlberg, knew that I wanted to take that, super fun, exciting, like 0 to 1 entrepreneurship experience and do something, like that again. Didn't know anything about tech, but, knew enough to know that like the world was changing and that I should probably learn at least, what the impact of technology could be on the problems that I cared about. So spent a lot of time talking to people who were working in the, at the intersection of technology and social impact or economic opportunity in the US. Decided I did want to do the like really early stage thing, and sort of randomly connected with a guy named Jimmy Chen who had founded Propel about a year before I met him, through an accelerator program that is now part of the Robin Hood Foundation. It's called Blue Ridge Labs. It's an amazing program. I would highly encourage everybody to check it out. They primarily take people from traditional technology backgrounds and expose them to the problems faced by low-income New Yorkers. And he had been working on SNAP, the program formerly known as food stamps. And when I joined, we were operating a product that was a little bit different from the one that we operate today, but we were trying to make it easier to apply for SNAP benefits in New York. We were facing all sorts of obstacles from the government, and I'm sure we'll get into some of those things later. But the systems for applying for benefits are, as you might expect, pretty clunky and inefficient. and we wanted to try to make it, we wanted to build TurboTax for food stamps. We built it, the product sort of worked, but it was not, we never really achieved any significant scale, and we couldn't identify a viable business model that made sense. But in the process of doing that, we were talking to SNAP recipients every day, understanding the experience of navigating these systems, and started to learn a little bit about what was the experience of managing your benefits once you were approved by the state, right? Once you got this card, because for these families, the SNAP benefits become a pretty significant portion of their household monthly spending. And what we realized was the systems for managing those benefits were super outdated, right? The government was not thinking about building a modern user experience on top of this $70 billion program. Instead, it felt like a Target gift card. You would call the 1-800 number on the back of the card to figure out how much money you could spend at the grocery store that day. And the families who we talked to were doing this, 3, 4, 5 times a week. So we identified this like pretty minor but super recurring pain point, and thought like that's exactly what we want, and that's exactly where we think our skills can apply. Pretty quickly built a prototype of an app that allowed you to manage your EBT card balance and check your transaction history. A simple mobile banking app for the EBT card in Pennsylvania first, because we were doing a lot of our research in Philly. With the user testing group that we had put together, got really, really positive feedback. Started seeing how easy we could scale this up across other states. So we built it in New York, and then scaled across the country as quickly as we could. I think we did it in about 90 days because we wanted to go to market with an app for anybody with an EBT card. We didn't want to have to launch like the New York and Pennsylvania EBT app. We wanted to say like, if you have an EBT card, this is for you. And I'm really glad we did that, because when the app didn't work in certain states, or it doesn't still today, when the app is down in certain states, we get bombed by negative reviews that say, this app doesn't work in my state. And I think that could have sunk us really early on. So we took that approach of like, let's make this, anybody with an EBT card can use the product. That was really hard. There were a bunch of like really hacky things we had to do to do that. And I'm happy to go more into that later, but saw traction pretty early on, scaled up to all 50 states, got enough traction to raise a little bit of money, and sort of rebranded, renamed, and like formalized this product, which is now called Fresh EBT. Today, it's used by over 4 million families every month to manage the benefits that come on an EBT card.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know a lot of people with that app. I know a lot of people that got that right now. I'm glad that I'm actually speaking to the founder.
That's super cool. Yeah, so the app's used by about 1 in 5 families that have SNAP across the country. And on top of the kind of core EBT functionality, we've built a whole set of tools to help families navigate financial hardship, find resources to save money, earn additional income. And today we're thinking about building other financial tools that help this same population make it through the month and provide for their families with pride. So, we're working on a lot of different resources. I think as government benefit programs change, the child tax credit that was literally authorized by the House today is the most significant change to our users' financial lives in decades. Most of our users will get an additional $5,000 to $15,000 a year in income. That is like absolutely life-changing. And we think we have a role to play in helping people navigate that type of program as well.
Awesome. 2 fantastic ways to tackle financial health. Luke, if you could share next.
Yeah, I don't even, after hearing those 2 introductions, I don't even know why I'm on this panel. So for me, my kind of story starts, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, so was kind of immersed into sort of the culture of government, especially, D.C. and, early on it was the Clinton administration, or for me, when I was starting to kind of be present to government and politics, was the Clinton administration and the Republican House and Newt Gingrich and Contract for America. But I went to school at George Mason University in the DC area, and was the editor-in-chief of the college newspaper there. So had this really, and I thought that I was going to be kind of a journalist after school, and then realized the competition was stiff and journalists don't make any money. So I started to actually write a lot, but then was really interested in publishing. And this was kind of the early-ish days of the internet. So I started teaching myself how to code because I was really interested in how do you, what's the internet? How do you build things on the internet? And I was very active in the kind of free Tibet movement at that time, and was teaching myself to code. And I know, like, I don't know if folks are familiar with like the Smithsonian Folklife Festival in DC every year during kind of July. They have it 2 states and a country. Well, around that time, the country that they picked was Tibet, which, is not really a country, but so I was working with the organization, and the Dalai Lama was coming to visit the mall to do a talk, during that time. So they asked me if I could build the website for all the Dalai Lama's, activities. So I always joke, like, my first website was, I was the Dalai Lama's webmaster. But really started getting fascinated with the internet and building kind of publishing on the internet and the immediacy of it, and just being in the low cost aspect of building, and really getting disgruntled with what was happening as, kind of the politics of DC kind of evolved as it went on, and during the Clinton administration, and just kind of looked around and thought, where do I want to be? What do I want to do? And I was really interested in, technology and kind of the design aspects of technology of the web, and just got up and left and drove to California. No job, got an apartment and lived in California, or moved to Berkeley for a year. It was during the .com boom. So there wasn't a lot of, it was actually, I timed it during the .com bust, like right at the beginning of the bust. So I timed it perfectly. But found a place in Berkeley and lived there, and got a job at a startup, and watched that startup kind of get $30 million and then spend $30 million. And it was just, it's kind of eye-opening to see that process and what, how that works. And we ended up kind of turning it around, but it didn't have sort of this, storybook ending where it went IPO or somebody bought it for $1 billion. But it was just a reality of kind of the .com boom. But I learned a lot about building, company and what it takes to build a startup. Just started kind of tinkering and doing things. And then, so I had a lot of experience kind of writing, understanding government, and understanding, technology, really like how technology works, which at that time was, as the Obama administration started to come, one of the first things that Obama did, I think it was the first thing, was he signed something called the Open Government Directive, or the Open Government Initiative, and basically, had this call for transparency and collaboration, and it opened up doors for things like open data, open source, and things like that, and in government, which fundamentally to me it's fundamental to me and what I call kind of democracy technology and scaling kind of government solutions. And back then people thought open source was weird and didn't know what to make of it, and now it's kind of mainstream. But I started working on kind of building websites for a small city, and a friend of mine, he was really early on in his career, and he decided to go into local government, become an IT director, a CIO for a small city in Texas. And he was kind of integrating new technology. He was in Fast Company and Wall Street Journal, and he was kind of, this sort of young gun deciding to take the path of good in government. And we started working together, and I helped him build their website. And the theme that I used was kind of a WordPress theme, and I called it GovPress, and it was like a government WordPress theme. And we ended up having like a government event and right outside of Austin in the town that he was in. And there was like 150 people that came. It was kind of the early kind of civic tech, gov tech, startup folks. It was about 150 people of us, and we kind of converged. And he had invited like local government people from around Texas to come to this event. And we ended up taking a tour of this town that had become famous at that time for like using Gmail and these tools that are on the internet. I was talking to this man who, tall, skinny, thin, cowboy hat wearing, you know, older man, classic sort of Texas cowboy. And he was, you know, he was asking me what I do. I do websites. And he said, well, we had a website, and we had a volunteer helping us. The city had a website. We had a volunteer helping us do it. And he died. He had a heart attack and died. And nobody knew how to access anything. So what we had to do was we had to get a whole new www and a new website. So they like had to do everything. And my mind was just kind of blown that this is even possible, that a city could have their fundamental, you know, like what Code for America socialized, this concept of like the front door, the digital front door of government, of your local government, is in the hands of a volunteer. And if something happens, you know, everybody in the community is impacted. So it just really hit me that, you know, we really needed to figure out a way to, how do we scale the basic concepts, the basic, you know, front door of government, local governments, especially for communities that, you know, aren't familiar with technology. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know what they should be paying. And they're not buying technology in a way that allows them to scale it, or to have technology that isn't going to be dated. And that's what you're seeing with local governments, is they're buying, you know, this kind of bespoke technology, and it's dated. You know, a contractor will come in and be like, it's this much money, give us the check, see you later, thank you. And then, you know, it doesn't improve. And there's a lot of issues that are impacted by that. There's encryption issues, there are mobility, security, inclusion, accessibility. There's all these issues that start to, you know, don't get accounted for. So me and some other folks that I had met decided that we wanted to kind of focus on that basic, fundamental, really boring, you know, aspect of local government, which is, you know, the website. How do we scale that? How do we scale helping, you know, all these cities? They don't have IT departments. They don't have designers. They, you know, how do we help them scale buying it and deploying it and continuously maintaining it, where all they really have to do is feel empowered to kind of log in, update their website, understand what they're doing. If they need to support, they can get it, but they don't have to manage like the hosting or the updates or making sure that things are encrypted or all the nuances of accessibility. And we kind of are working to kind of bring all that in and make it seamless for you know, cities. And there's, you know, there's tens of thousands of cities in America that are dealing with this problem.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luke. Yeah, when I checked out ProudCity's website, I think it showed a fact that I hadn't thought of, which is that there are thousands of municipalities and localities in the US that still have no digital footprint. So to ask a question, Jeff, you said that you had to get a little hacky to figure things out for all 50 states of America. And I know that in some other panels we've often talked about how regulation can either hinder or aid innovation, especially tech innovation. And I wonder if some of you had any interesting run-ins. You know, you all work with really big, sometimes very slow-moving systems. And I wonder if you have any insights about trends that you're seeing, whether government is, you know, this day actually helping drive innovation, and what are specific things that can be done to help you do your job better? We can start with anyone who'd like to volunteer. Or I can call on one of you. Maybe, I know, Jeff, I know you probably have stories, so I'll actually call on you.
Sure, no problem. So I think we operate in sort of like a regulatory gray space because we are not trying to contract with the government. We didn't want to contract with the government. We thought about that path early on and decided it didn't make sense for us and it was going to slow us down quite a lot. And so we have tried to avoid getting involved in the regulatory complexity and instead tried to approach with a private sector model. So there's like a very clear parallel for us with the way Plaid works and the way, for the people we were talking to in the government, like mint.com was the example that they knew, or like an early budgeting tool that sort of pulled in data from your different accounts. And so we sort of tried to explain how our technology worked in really simple, clear ways using parallels that people understood. But we don't want necessarily a regulated approach to doing this. I think if the government wanted to try to categorize us and give us sort of formal access to these systems, we'd be totally open to it. There is a parallel there for like the IRS and the e-file systems that TurboTax and like actually use. There's an official door, but it didn't start out that way. And so, we're very open to finding, a regulated way to do this. But from our perspective, we are operating on behalf of an EBT cardholder, and we're fetching their account information on their behalf. We don't store their credentials. We don't store their PII. We don't store their personal data. We are simply, creating a better user interface on top of an existing website, basically. So the EBT vendors, the private companies that operate the EBT systems, operate a website. It's a crappy website. And so we build a better user interface on top of that website. I think when we started talking to the people in the EBT space, they didn't know what to do with us. They didn't know how to think about us. And so we had to just continue saying the same things over and over and over again about, what our mission was, how the technology worked, what we do and don't do with data. We still have to do that in various kind of settings to just be really, really clear about, why we are not in violation of any particular rules, but we're also not subject to all of the same rules that the EBT vendors are because they're actually contracted by the state, and we're a private layer that a customer authorizes, on their behalf to do this data interaction.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I'm going to actually turn that into a question now for Phaedra. Phaedra, you have this incredible background, and you're not only providing a service, but oftentimes it seems like what you're also doing is pushing for so much social change, big systemic change. And a lot of the students and members of the public here that we work with are also committed to this singular mission that can work with technology, or at least in the public sector, that's about making a positive change in the world. And I wonder if you have any lessons to share about how you have brought so many parts of your background together to do what you do.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the best advice I ever actually got was from Prince, and he told me that if you want to play in Madison Square Garden, you have to get used to booze, because the only place that you don't get booed is playing in your backyard. And so I think about probably the most important skill is the ability to continue to move forward without fear of other people's opinions. And I think to the extent that the core of your work is values-based, and that you are contesting for power against people who want to keep it and don't want to make those changes, probably the most important skill is just the ability to continue to move forward and not take other things personal. Because when you are working to change systems that are built for people, the people who it's built for contest and say, we want the system built for us. And I think about it for us as simple things. As we build our product, one thing we've done is we don't take people's taxes. We just let them self-declare their income, which is crazy insane for most people, that you don't have to prove you're poor. And our belief is if you've missed 3 water bills, which is the requirements, you probably are struggling. We don't need a copy of your taxes or your income to prove it. And so I think it is the belief. And the thing that I think I learned in the labor movement, the best part about the labor movement is people are paying your salary with their dues, and they expect something in return. And so it's not like when I went into the nonprofit world, which is a little more about like individual and how you feel. In the labor movement, it's like, I'm paying money to your salary. And I think for me, I'm constantly thinking that what we do has to be measurable, like to the extent that we have leveraged venture capital in a way that not many Black women have, or many people who are doing social change. If I can't say to my team, this many people's lives are better because we exist, if you can't quantify it, then it's not worth it to me. And so I think it really is just the ability to go forward, to contest for power, and to keep the people that you think are impacted by the change at the center of your way you measure success, instead of affirmation by people who are not the people whose world you're seeking to improve. And I just think that's been important. I will say the last thing I discovered is I think sometimes in social change, people value emotion and not as much skill always. And so one thing I learned about technology, and what I mean by that is the skills to scale are different than the skills on one-on-one interaction. And so having someone who understands how things scale is actually really important when you want to make large scale social change. And so I think in addition to the personal emotional, it's like learning that, you know, at the time I was like, who business school, worked at, you know, McKinsey, Google, losers, like who wants those arrogant people? And then I was like, oh my gosh, you know what? There's certain things they do know. And I was like, and so I just think it's also about realizing what skills help you grow and keeping the people that you are working on behalf of at the core of your mission.
Thank you. I know I'm always in awe of my former consultant colleagues and classmates' ability to make incredible PowerPoints. So it's a hard appreciation for that skill. I'm going to open it up now to everyone else's questions. And I see, Ria, you have your hand raised, so please go ahead.
Thanks, Luke, Jeff, Phaedra. Am I pronouncing your name correct? Yes. Okay. Thanks. Thank you so much for sharing your journeys. And I think it's been wonderful to hear about your experiences and your suggestions as well, like specifically like Phaedra, your point on being okay with being booed. I think it strikes a lot with me at a personal level. Like if I'm trying to do something new, I've always been really worried about it like failing, and often stopped doing it in the first place. Just maybe I thought I can give you a brief background of myself before jumping down to the question. I am a former consultant, but not a McKinsey or anything. I worked in social impact consulting. I spent 2 years working with state governments back home in India, helping them improve the quality of education provided in public schools. And so we working with government day in and day out, trying to help them use innovative techniques to provide public service efficiently. So for instance, I did a lot of work with the management information systems, making sure that the user interfaces like friendly for customers, or that they can receive and address complaints. They can use the data well to implement data-backed interventions, worked on like proper delivery of government schemes by streamlining the platform through which they pay out these benefits. So did a lot of this work, and really passionate about improving governance. So given this background, I'm really interested to hear about your experience of engaging with the government. I know you were working with the government, like outside the government, on improving governance and not really inside. So your engagement with the government might be different, but still, I think it'll be useful to hear like how you manage. Like there may have been some touch points with the government while you were building your apps, like just understanding their system, getting their data. I don't know, getting their buy-in, if not necessarily going through the regulatory approvals. So how was that experience, and how did you manage to go about it? How did you manage to be successful with it? Because personally, I feel I've just found it so difficult to engage with the government. It feels like hitting a rock, and after a point, your motivation goes like it demotivates you, and it stops you from going further in that direction. So, would love to hear your take on it.
Thank you, Ria. Anyone or to our panelists, anyone who'd specifically like to answer? maybe Luke, since you work with cities all over the country, that would be a good question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is. I think there's two things. What Phaedra said, around having some core operating values and principles is important to ground yourself in this space. Because there is a welcome to I'm on a call. Welcome to distance learning. That's really important to have, right? Is like knowing what your values are, knowing what drives you, because it's going to get you through moments like you just said, when you're dealing with government and it's super frustrating, and knowing sort of your inner compass and what's driving you is going to help you get through that. So it's always going to be that way. You're always going to, like, I think that no matter where you are dealing with government, it's just that's part of the the game that we're playing. For us, it's not so much about, like, we don't deal with regulatory or any of the kind of political stuff so much as, although it does come into play when there's like council who decide things, and we just had something recently. But for us, it's much more around kind of the inner operations, specifically around procurement, and culture around that. And government has kind of an idea of how they procure things, right? They do these big purchases, kind of like a road or a bridge, and then they move to the next thing. And they really, it's like sort of a purchase that is different than the way we buy technology, right? So they want to buy this kind of big upfront road or bridge, and they want to buy technology the same way, and technology doesn't work that way. So people buy these systems that are technology, and then they're left holding them, and they're just dated. And we all know that the phones that we use, the computers, everything runs on software. And software, the model around it is we pay money, and except for hardware, right, is different, but you pay money on a subscription basis, and your expectation is things are going to get taken care of. They're going to get updated, they're going to get more secure, the features are going to get better, and that's the expectation. So for us, it's really focusing on how do we, and then how do we hack the procurement process? And it aligns with our values, in that we think that the process should be really streamlined, really transparent, and that includes the pricing. So for us, we have a population-based model for cities, and you can go to our website and you can type in your city and see how much it costs. And it's much more transparent in that way. And our approach is really to kind of think, long tail, as they say, or economies of scale, and really serving cities at scale and streamlining that process for them to purchase and get onboarded, so that it's not expensive for them, and it's not this laborious process. And for us, it's really trying to educate people on what is great technology, or what's the standard, the modern standard for the technologies that you should be buying, and understanding, like I always say, like, I'm trying to sell technology to my mom, and I don't know about y'all's moms, but my mom doesn't know technology. And so, we're trying to, keep that in mind. And it's really hard, and you have to really scale that down. But so there's the education part of it. And then it's just being truly transparent. There's a lot of opportunistic vendors in the market that are like, well, we want to build, somebody, the government will say, we need this. And somebody will say, well, how much is it? And the vendor will be like, well, how much do you got? Right. And for us, it's like, it's transparent. And I think for, the pricing is based on population, and it's fully transparent. If you don't want to talk to us, you can get all the information that you need on the website, from pricing to the specifications to understanding how we're going to do, online support and things like that. And it's, you don't have to talk to a salesperson. And at the end of the day, for us, it's less about, kind of policy and governance, and much more about streamlining that procurement and awareness process, so that they start to know what they know and know what they don't know, and then they can just be streamlining in that purchase. So I think with local governments, especially, it's a education campaign as well as like a procurement, quote, hack.
Thanks so much. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
One quick thing to add. I mean, I think our approach it's quite different if we're not selling to government, and it actually makes it in some ways harder because again, there's like no label, there's no category, there's just a like, who are you and why are you here and what do you want from me? And so that actually was really hard for us early on, and it was just like incredible persistence of telling the same story and building relationships over time. And what we found with like the EBT world, it was like a really small, tight-knit group of industry insiders who had been doing this for a long time. And so like getting in the door to like their little, like the weirdest conference I've ever been to is called EBT Next Gen. It's literally a conference just focused on like the EBT system. And like they all know each other, and it's like the most fun time of the year where they all go to Florida and get drunk with each other. And like we had to show up and be like, hi, here we are, like take us seriously. And then only once we had some traction and could demonstrate the impact of the product could we be taken seriously. And we weren't really asking for anything other than like, don't try to get rid of us.
Yeah, I see. Thank you so much. Tyreek, I think you had your hand up first. So,
yes,
and I'm sorry if I butchered your name. Go ahead.
I have a question for Phaedra. I know that you're in like a lot of engagement when it comes to like the bell reform and stuff like that. My question is, how can I get involved into an organization that involves like social change? Like, because I've been trying to look up a lot of organizations, and I don't know how to actually, because I don't want to be like a support. I want to actually be in. Like I'm a college student at Monroe College in the Bronx, and my goal is to after finishing law school, I want to be a politician, but I would like to be inside of an organization where I can support them and we could like elaborate on ideas and stuff.
Such a great question. The best way that we ever found folks who were entering were internships, and there's some amazing organizations. I have a friend, Michael Blake, who, if you have a Twitter, you can reach out to him directly. If he doesn't respond, I'm happy to tell you. He used to be the assembly member there. He's now working on a mayoral race, worked in the Obama White House, is in the Bronx, and does some incredible work. And so one, I think there's all of these leaders who are actually looking for like, how do you get people engaged? So I've seen internships work really well because you learn a lot. People think you have value. You're in the center of it. And almost any social justice organization you find will take an intern because they're so grateful for the support and help. An amazing organization there in New York is also Reform, which run by a guy named Robert Rooks, which is started by Jay-Z, Meek Mill, and others, and is working on criminal justice reform. Amazing. I think it's a little bit hard because of COVID. So I don't know like exactly how it works in the COVID moment, but I think there's amazing organizations in New York, and I would reach out and say, can I volunteer? And all of those organizations I've ever worked with are eager to take a volunteer that is consistent. Better to say I'll be there 1 day, 3 hours, like than it is anything else. But I'm happy to provide any names that would be helpful. But that would be my best recommendation, is to go pick one organization, one cause you care about, and get really integrated into that organization.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah, great. Happy to be.
Thank you so much, Phaedra. So we have a question in the chat, which asks that, it seems like all of you have chosen to kind of take an outsider approach to change. And the question asks, have you ever considered working in-house for federal, local, or state government? And if, why or why not?
Never. Not for 1 second.
Elaborate, please.
I think when I was in the labor movement, I realized that a lot of elected officials are moved by other people. So I think if I have the ability to move people or be the people moved, I would always choose to be the people moving. They're also constantly fundraising. And so that didn't make sense. So it wasn't the right thing for me. I think there's incredible people going in right now that are amazing. So I don't think, you also have to think like, is your value add so unique? I think in the world of technology, there aren't a lot of people who successfully raise money and work on these issues that like Jeff and others are working on. And so I actually feel like I actually have a very specific need and that I can serve better. I think there's a lot of amazing humans who are in government. And so my probably greatest ability is actually where I am.
What about any thoughts from Luke or Jeff?
I wouldn't say never. I wouldn't go as far as Phaedra, but I think for where we're looking at the the dynamic is different. Like we work with amazing people, right? And I have problems with a lot of problems with government. I could pop off about that and spend the rest of the time doing that. But I think that for us, we work with people who they live in their communities. They're not elected, and they want to do right by their communities. It's their neighbors. These are small, sometimes, our smallest city is 500 people, right? So, you can, if you're a small city and you're that small, it's easy to yell at your neighbor if they're running the local government and doing something wrong, because they probably live right across the street from you. So there's this dynamic that we have where people are really, they have that, and they have that local pride, right? So their intent, I think, is different than, or their motivations are different than kind of the political, the true sort of political elected, and you got to cater and you got to you got to follow what people want, and as opposed to like doing what you think is right. And I don't know if it never would, but it doesn't, knowing sort of the technology tools they use and how they collaborate and the time that it takes to change, the time that you need to invest in that. One, I'm too old to be doing that because I don't have enough time. But two, it's just the culture for me is not the same, like to implement, when you can deploy things and launch things so much quicker, outside of government and entrepreneurial environment. It's just, you can't do that within government. But I will say, and I'm sure, Phaedra and Jeff, have the same, sort of backstories, being close to government, and government leaders, city managers, even, and less so now for me, but even at the federal level, especially when Obama was president, and knowing a lot of people on the technology side there, having access to them and being able to explain why they should be doing something and why they're doing something wrong and what the way they should be doing it is power. And there's I've been fortunate enough to have those opportunities to do that and see people make changes because of those conversations and those relationships. So I like working with a lot of the government people, especially the local level, because there's true passion for it, but there's also I think it's important to kind of engage with them.
And Jeff, what about you? Will we see you in Florida as the leader of SNAP or EBT Next Gen?
Yeah, I find there to be some allure, but I don't think I would be personally happy for very long in a role in the government. But I do think, and again, like I'll harp on the child tax credit. Like there is the ability, rare and very hard to come by, and takes decades of work from lots of people. But there is the ability to have incredible systems change from inside the government, and I think there's appeal to that. But I think it takes an unbelievable dedication and patience that I'm not sure that I have for any one particular thing. But I have enormous respect for the people who have spent 10 years working to fight for something like a refundable child tax credit. So I don't know, but probably not for me in the near term. I love the speed and the excitement and the the ability to build on top of those things from the outside.
Great. We have another question from JP that actually kind of in line with what Phaedra, you were talking about how people in government respond to people on the outside. And it's specifically about how you or other people can actually, advocate for government to be more internally innovative and aggressive about actually leading on technology. Besides, advocacy.
I think part of what's hard is that there's all these antiquated procurement systems that are make it difficult to be able to try things. And I think so most people in government that we've worked with, who are the most amazing humans, totally committed to social change, often have very low risk tolerance. And so it's better to stay with the old broken that than it is to like innovate, because they've seen consequences. And so one is, I guess I would say, on the like procurement side, what makes it difficult is often the conditions around qualifying for something require that you have a certain amount of years of experience, or you have a certain amount of money in the bank, or things I think make it difficult for people who are new and emerging. So one, just the qualifications. Two is, I think, on like one software we see in a lot of our clients is Oracle. And sometimes Oracle is very strict in its rules, right? So it's like, you can't change a payment date, as an example. Like, so if someone fails, like one of our clients, 20% of the times they're successful in payment plans, and mostly because people fail 80% of the time, because based on an Oracle system, if you don't pay your payment Friday at 8 o'clock, you fail. There's not an option to extend or to do something else. And so, but in order to change Oracle, you would need to change so many things that are dependent on it, that there's a fear of, if I change this bad thing, what will the additional consequences be? And so in my experience, I don't think that people don't intellectually want it. I think the system is structured where it makes it difficult to change. And then in addition, the system that they're actually using day to day is it's so intertwined that it's frightening to actually think about changing it. And then last is, there are some of the most incredible people that I've met in government, but there's also some people who aren't the most incredible. And one who said to me, I was saying, this is so great when we're doing criminal justice. This is going to improve people's experience. And then this woman said to me, oh, I get it. You care about people's experience and I don't. And I was like, oh, yeah, it is a problem, because I think of someone as a customer. And especially it is a new thing to think of low income people who are dependent on resources as customers, instead of like making them prove themselves. And so I think those things all add up for at least the work that we do, to why it's hard to innovate. And so impressed with what Propel is doing, because we don't, I shouldn't say volunteer, we work with the government. And the reason is because there's not a different model, because we want them to take the risk. So like, we do payment plans. And so if we worked with someone else, people would have to pay interest, or it would end up being predatory, and short-term loans are awful for many reasons. But I think figuring out ways to work with, but around is probably the best model.
Luke, you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, getting involved with government is important, right? I wish I would have done it earlier. I think that, we see interns come in and impact, younger people coming in, especially at the local level, and showing up and impacting, how people think, because they're educating them on, as Phaedra said, on, just like, you don't need to procure things in this way. And some of it is cultural. It's like, this is the way we do it. Some of it is there are regulations behind it. But I think that, getting involved early on in your career, just, and immersing yourself into it, and, understanding the system, then you know how to change it, right? And I think that that's just a recommendation that I would have for everyone, is just to kind of get involved and learn how government works, so then you can, properly, whether you stay inside to impact it, and fight the good fight inside, or you get out and you can, understand how to talk to the challenges and address them from a different perspective, whether it's a venture or a nonprofit or whatever it is. So you can truly articulate it, and people aren't like, oh, they don't get it, right? And you can say, no, I do get it. I've been there, and this is how I think it should be changed.
Thanks for that. If there are any audience questions, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I can throw one out. I know that this is probably a question that you have been asked a million times at this point, but certainly I would love to hear it. How has COVID impacted the work that you do? And specifically, have you had to identify new services that you can provide or ways that you need to adapt the products that you're offering? I know this is a huge question, and you've probably been talking about it for about a year. But if there are, almost actually a year looking back, if there are any stories or lessons that you have to offer about that, we'd love to hear it.
Our users, people who get SNAP benefits, tend to be in the categories of those who have been disproportionately affected by the job loss, by the virus itself. So we pretty quickly started running a weekly pulse survey to understand what was happening among our users, to figure out how we could respond around exactly a year ago. And it was devastating. I mean, it was hard to fathom the severity of the impacts that we were seeing. Over the course of the last year, we basically, our user base has doubled as more people have applied for SNAP, and also, as those who are on SNAP have needed to find additional resources to navigate the complex changes that have been happening to benefits. I think that's been the most interesting work that we've done, is as a result of the CARES Act and the bill that passed in December. There have just been enormous changes to SNAP and adjacent programs. So you may have heard of PEBT, which was the pandemic EBT program authorized for any families that get or that are enrolled in the National School Lunch Program. All of those suddenly became EBT benefits. So many of our users were getting new types of benefits on their card. The communication from the government was largely in the form of mailed letters, which we know isn't super useful. So there were just so many questions about, what are these benefits? What am I eligible for? If I get unemployment, how is that going to affect my benefits? And so we spun up a little, information center about benefit changes, and it became the most used feature in the app relatively quickly. About 70% of our users are using that feature every month to just understand how their benefits are changing, how long these changes are going to last, and all of the different, other resources that are becoming available as a result of the pandemic. We also spun up a partnership with a nonprofit called Give Directly to deploy direct cash transfers to our users. We also, again, about a year ago, we spent a lot of time brainstorming what's the fastest way we could get cash to people. I think it was March 20th that we sent our first payments out, and to date have deployed over $140 million in $1,000 increments to families who use Fresh EBT, just in the form of an unconditional cash grant for whatever you need help with. And that was, I think that was huge for our user base, but it was also the most exciting work that most of us at Propel had done before. So.
Awesome. And Luke, how about you? What are you seeing at the city level? Is there anything new that cities are or have been struggling with for the past year?
I think that, it's all across the board, but for us in particular, I think that, and this is sort of part of kind of our mission, or, our values, or way that we see the world is, more and more people go to kind of the government website, and if the experience is not good, it's not mobile, or it's, crazy. There's a lot of crazy government websites. It's a reflection of how they think, it's to Phaedra's point on the customer, right? It's how they perceive the customer. And I think, for a long time, it wasn't important, right? The website wasn't important. But with COVID, people can't really go to City Hall. So more important, people are going online. So a lot of cities are starting to realize, oh, we have a website, and it's not like this idea of like a website. It's their service center. It's their online service center. And we need to, prioritize this. We need to make it so it's user friendly, so it's accessible and mobile, and performant. And I think a lot of cities are really starting to realize that. And it's not like, it's not going to change, even after COVID, people are going to get more comfortable with that's how they're going to do it, both the public, but also people on the government side. It's just going to streamline a lot of their operations. And I think it's, this whole experience has started to get people to rethink what it means to deliver government services. And especially when people who, aren't able to show up to City Hall, from 9 to 5, or, they need access, the bandwidth is low, or, they have just a mobile phone, they don't have a computer. So there's all these things that I think government is thinking about. And, we've been kind of championing sort of, look, this is boring, but this is the front door to how people are going to perceive you and whether you really care for them. So we're starting to see that, like we're starting to see sort of government is realizing that it's not like the website is not just the IT person in the corner that's doing that, it's a service delivery thing. And it's a bigger part of what it means to be, to do public service. And I think they're starting to take it a lot more serious.
Thanks so much. Phaedra, if we could trouble you to share too.
The thing that's been interesting about COVID, and I don't say this as a political statement, more just watching the reality of local governments. Under the Trump administration, we saw panic under local governments, just fear of resources, and just, I think, and it's been interesting to watch how our clients are now feeling a little bit more confident that they're going to see resources for social services, resources for human service, so that's been interesting because it went from kind of panic to like, there's a plan coming. So that's been one thing that there's definitely been a shift in. I think that COVID has been, the thing I worry about the most is that I don't think people understand enough how many people are suffering and aren't prepared for that. And so like in places where we work with utility bills, as an example, like 40% of people are behind in large cities. And it's like, it's in basic human needs. And when we talk to people, it's people, we offer $5 payment plans, and people don't have $5 all the time. Try a credit card, it doesn't work, try something else. And so I think the thing that I would say that our business has grown. And I think, as Jeff said, like the most impactful thing we get to do is the relief that you just come to a website and you can just say, I qualify because I live in the county, and people are so appreciative. It is like, I do customer service because on the phones, because it just affirms why I created this company, is because people are just like, they bless me. It's just like the most fun work we do. But I will say the thing I worry about is that there isn't a national conversation about where people really are financially, how people are waiting for each kind of stimulus to like be able to make it through the next period. And I think it is like, typically we have an idea who's been low income. What's been interesting in this moment is it's a lot of people, for example, who've never missed a bill before. It's a lot of people who are struggling. And I just think that's probably the most important thing, is that the economics of this country have fundamentally shifted, and we are not having a clear enough conversation that almost 1 out of 2 people cannot pay their water, struggling with food insecurity. And so that's probably the thing, that our business has actually grown largely because people are in that space. But I think we just have to make sure that the solutions that the country needs recognize where people are.
Thank you so much for that. Any questions from the audience before we wrap up? I can give back everyone's time a little early today. Though I hate to end on a COVID note, so that was my bad for saving this question until the last one. But to put a positive spin on it, Matt, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Ellen. I have one question. And so I guess all of you mentioned, I think, a little bit about the funding side of things. I know Shout out to Phaedra and Promise. I know they were just in TechCrunch and talking like they just raised a round of funding, which is I know is significant. So shout out for that. But I guess, from one of the topics like we talk about a lot is, funding, like how do you get funding from investors, VCs? Like being in this space, I feel like this is like a really interesting pitch to VCs or really any investor. Like how, maybe just sharing some insight or like how have you kind of experienced the investor piece of that? Because I get to definitely see like some pushback just from, the risk involved, like how things can change, with policy and those kind of things.
So I can, this is something that, I personally struggle with and think about. And, we decided to bootstrap our company and we're continuing to do that. But we're at a point now where we really need to think about how can we, take it to the next level in a way that's going to be, exponential. And where we are, we kind of have, hit our cap on how we can do that. And, for like, especially right now, and I'm sure, Jeff and Phaedra experience the same thing, but, there's a lot of interest in GovTech right now. There's, VCs, private equities, there's a lot of M&A activity, merger and acquisition activity. So we get a lot of people that are reaching out to us, whether it's acquisition or, potential funding and things like that. But I struggle with this, and Phaedra, maybe you can, consult me after this call. But, it's really, what I see in kind of the government, the government technology market is, it's just a roll up, and it's a roll up by private equity companies that are fully trying to operationalize and not focus on the innovation part of technology. It's just a land grab for customers, and then it's, they streamline the business operations, and then it's, even worse service. And, especially for local government, a lot of people see government as, they're providing the service, when in the background, there's a lot of vendors that are doing it. And, democracy and the community and government, our impression of them is really, it's the service that these vendors are providing is determining how we perceive government. And I think that the shift that we're seeing with government technology is there's a lot of VCs and private equity firms that are just like treating this industry and democracy technology like they would Facebook or Twitter or any, pick your, the latest app, Instagram or Instacart or any of these things. And it's different, it's just the incentives are different. And I worry about, the ecosystem that is created to create wealth for certain people, and how that's impacting kind of how people are investing in government technology. So for us, we haven't taken any funding yet. It's something that we're seriously considering, but we want to be intentional with it. So Phaedra, you can consult me after this and give me advice, talk me down.
Any notes from Phaedra or Jeff?
So we've raised about 30 million from venture capital. The reason it was really helpful for us is I think we couldn't have lived our values without it, which is probably contrary to what people think. Like doing a pivot because we didn't like our clients, we never could have done that as a regular business. We would have had to figure it out or lay people off or do things differently. And so for us, venture capital has been a way to experiment and to fail, which has been an incredible luxury. And even when we were trying out, how do we think about creating a payment system? We had the capital where we could pay people's tickets and then see if they paid us back without consequence. And so we wouldn't have been able to build products that were good for working people without it, because we just wouldn't have we couldn't have afforded to experiment. And so venture capital has allowed us to experiment. I do think it's important to find specific investors who understand who you are and what you're trying to achieve. That has probably been the most important thing. Because like when we did the pivot, people were like, oh, of course you're not going to sell to the feds for immigration. Like it was, like it wasn't like anyone was like, oh no, you should do this. Or, and so I think having investors aligned is probably the most important thing. I think as you think about raising, I think what is hard is people don't understand government. And so they don't understand like slow cycles or, and they do think of it, I think, in the way that private equity does, which is someone once said, private equity thinks of government as an annuity. Because once you get a contract, you're just going to keep it for so long that it just yields dividends. And so I think venture capital doesn't understand it. I also think there's not a lot of models for non-predatory investment in technology, right? It's like, I see all these like, who shall remain nameless companies like, ooh, new good lending. And it's like, oh, it's only 40% for like 3 months. And so part of it is, it's like, it is naturally extractive. And so the challenge is how do you build extractive companies that don't harm people? And I would just say like, today, I think we can do it. There's been times where I thought we couldn't. It's just a hard thing to do, but I don't know who else's money you would use who gives you the luxury of figuring it out. And I feel like my purpose is like, when I was in the labor movement, we'd get these young people who wanted to volunteer and they'd always be like, we're with the people. And they would dress raggedy and they would think they needed to speak in a certain way. And I would be like, the best thing we can do is like show up as our best selves and perform in a way. So I want people to have the most beautiful technology, which means I want to hire better engineers than Facebook has. I want people to be treated on the phone with dignity and respect, which means that I can afford to hire someone who assumes that they are customers. And so I just didn't know how to build a world-class system that gave me the ability to innovate and pilot and try without the luxury of venture capital. So for us, it was the best model. And also the reality as a human is most startups fail. So like, to me, I'm like, we already lasted 4 years. We're winners. Like, it's like, and so for me, that's why we did venture capital. We just raised 20, and largely, I think, because of this moment. And so that's why I would highly recommend it. And I think people deserve resources. And so venture capital should fund working people and should fund good government. And to give up on it for me would have been not the right move.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Phaedra, like being honest and aligning with venture capitalists that get government, is really important. And like I've seen people in kind of my network who have started GovTech companies, and there's this period where they take money and then the honeymoon's over and the VC is like, what's up? Like why aren't sales spiking? We gave you money. And like, well, we explained the long sales cycle or it's different. And then it just becomes a culture clash, and it's, and the founder is like, we told you this, and really getting alignment on it is really important. And otherwise it's just, I've seen, like to your point, Phaedra, there's several GovTech startups that have failed because of that breakdown.
Jeff, if you have anything to add, we can give you the last word for the evening.
I think Phaedra said so much of what I would have said in terms of the alignment of the investors. Finding when we went in and talked to investors about people on food stamps, like most of the time it was blank stares. And so when you find somebody who actually gets it and who actually can like spend the time to understand the problem space and the opportunity, that's where I think we found a fit. I think that risk for us is like, I don't know that we want to be on the like, before we raise, there's a natural inclination to like stay on the treadmill, and your investors sort of are incentivized to like have you continue to grow as a company and then like have you raise the next big round. And I think we're trying to be pretty intentional about, at the moment before every next fundraise, it's like, do we actually still need this model to grow our business, or like are we doing okay without them, rather than just assuming that like we were, the round itself is the milestone. Find the milestones that make sense for our business and then use the funding to reach them if we need that. I think that's like the only thing I would add.
All right. Well, thank you so much again to the three of you for coming and sharing about your missions and your stories and everything. I know I'm super grateful. This isn't a topic that we get to talk about often at Tsai City, but I know that it's one that a lot of our students have been interested in. So thank you again so much for joining us. And everyone, I'll send a little information about our panelists tomorrow, along with the event survey I mentioned, and a link to all the rest of our workshops. Please join us anytime.